Welcome to Kunsang Payul Choling for a Wednesday night teaching by Jetsunma Ahkon Lhamo. We're really glad to have you join us. Tonight's teaching is entitled, You Need Courage on the Path to Enlightenment. And I think we've all kind of found that to be true, so this will help. We will begin now. This was originally given in 1990.
The difficulty that we as when we think about taking an empowerment or making a commitment of that kind is it can be quite a challenge because of our particular bias, particularly because of the way in which we are raised, ways in which we are raised, and most especially because this is a materialistic society. As a materialistic society, our first priority really is not the spiritual. And even those of us that were raised strongly within a religion have found, and I know I certainly saw that to be the case, that in many instances one's religion is something that one does once a week and then on special days. Even if one has some residue of that religious belief throughout one's life, the basis upon which one makes decision is not a religious one. When we decide whether or not we're going to university, whether or not we're going to school, we base that on how we plan to live our lives from a material point of view, not from a spiritual point of view. Rarely is that even taken into account. There are some that would say, well, I'm going to a Christian college because I feel like I want to have a Christian education. And so that may be the exception to the rule, but still in all, even in that case, there is a bias toward the material. The courses that we choose, the ideas that we hold to be dear, these ideas are based on material values. Before we are taught that we should have a spiritual foundation, we are taught that we should be successful. The skills that we are most often taught by our parents, the ones that our parents really spend time teaching us, are material skills. Rarely is there a home in which spirituality is communicated and the skills associated with spirituality are clearly communicated. Even if one has some vague idea about having faith in a certain religion or a certain being, one is not taught certain skills, skills that would make us understand how we can have that spiritual ideal fulfilled throughout our lives, how we can actually bring it into practice, how we can progress from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. We aren't taught a path. That path is not integral to our being. And so when we come to a point that we have to choose entering into a spiritual vehicle that is as profound and as exacting, really, and as responsible as this path that the Buddha teaches is, when we come to the point that we have to make such a decision and we realize that that decision is a heavy commitment, we have something of a struggle because we think that we're being taken away from values that we learned as children, where we think that we're doing something exotic or strange. It's very difficult for us to have the flexibility within our minds to see that this is merely a cultural bias, and that in other cultures this is not the case. In other cultures, what we do, the material bias that we have, is considered to be not only abnormal, but barbaric and actually sinful. So we have to develop a certain degree of flexibility within our minds, and we can't be as, what is the word I'm looking for? Having to do with a small territory. Can anyone help me? Provincial. We can't be as provincial as we have been brought up to be. That takes a great deal of courage. And maybe it doesn't take so much courage when we make the first decision. Many of us can just jump right in and say, yeah, it sounds good to me, I'm going to go for it. But we jump right in the same way that we say, yeah, let's go to a movie. We don't understand that this event is going to change us forever. And we don't understand that the responsibility starts after you've seen the movie. That at that point, one has to integrate what is received into one's life, or there's no value. In fact, it is a detriment. Because according to our tradition and according to our teachings, there's very little benefit in merely taking a teaching or merely hearing a teaching. It's not to say there is no benefit. You cannot have real progress without teaching. But if hearing a teaching is all you do, if you are not changed, if you do not accept the responsibility to practice, if you do not accept that something is required on your part, if you do not get clearly that now the ball is in your court, there's simply not much value. You might as well be watching Johnny Carson on The Tonight Show. Likewise, if you accept empowerment and you go to the empowerment merely for the feeling, thinking that, oh, empowerment, that sounds heavy duty, it sounds like a high of some kind. Let me go and take an empowerment and see what that tastes like. If you go to an empowerment for that reason, thinking that it's an exotic experience of that kind, there will be very little benefit. Pena Rinpoche, the head of our lineage, once said to me that the ritual object called vase or bumpa, which is used in empowerment and touched to the head, can be literally brought to the head with great force time and time again until one's head is flat and the bumpa is crushed. And there would still be no benefit if there were no faith, no consideration, no understanding, no acceptance, no renunciation. If these things do not exist within the context of one's experience, there will be very little long-lasting benefit, if any. And unfortunately, there are many people that hear Dharma teachings in that way and take empowerment in that way. So we have to avoid doing that, and yet we have to give ourselves some space and some time to compensate for the cultural bias that we really do have within us. It doesn't mean that suddenly you have to automatically put on robes and not like money anymore. Oh, heaven forbid, we would never do that to Americans. It doesn't mean that you have to change in some way that's so visible that your friends won't like you anymore. It isn't like that at all. But there is a level of understanding that has to be had within in order for these things to become precious. The level of understanding that I speak of can be very quiet, and in fact, my personal feeling is that that level of understanding is deepest and best when it's not all that visible. Those that I respect the most are those practitioners that don't feel that it's necessary to wear their renunciation on their sleeve, or particularly don't feel that they have to run around displaying to the world that they are good Dharma practitioners, indicating clearly that they are very humble and very good. Sometimes I think the best Dharma practitioners, the ones who really understand what it's all about, don't go for that kind of approval at all, but in fact practice quietly and sincerely within their minds, so that their renunciation may not be so visible, unless one has the eyes to see clearly and see what that person is really all about. But something has to occur within the practitioner that meets the experience of Dharma halfway. First of all, as an important prerequisite, the practitioner has to see the faults of cyclic existence. Has to. We have to be clear about that. And that even is difficult for us as Westerners, because we were taught not to do that. We were taught to think that in our society, this is a democracy, and in fact, this is governmental propaganda. You know, it goes that far. We are taught to think that in our society, this is a society in which we have a democracy, and clearly one can be anything one wants to be. We are taught when we are young in school. I remember being taught that in order to be president, one had to be 35 years old, and one had to have a certain college education, and one had to be a natural-born citizen. Thing that we want. And we're taught to have a very positive idea. We're taught to assert ourselves. We're taught to get what we want. And we're taught that it doesn't matter really so much how we get it, so long as we do it tastefully. And in this way, we are sort of taken away from the idea, from the ability, actually, to be able to examine cyclic existence in truth. We're taught really to fixate on the tremendous opportunity that we have here in America. The hidden teaching behind that is, don't look at the rest of the world, forget how everyone else is suffering. Think about what you can do here. Think how lucky you are. We are taught to think positive, that we are in a class of people that can have basically anything that we want to, and that we should go for that. We should be fine, upstanding people. We should be aggressive. We should really move straight ahead. That is the American ideal. That is the fulfillment of the American dream. But in doing that, the underlying, very quiet teaching is that we are taught not to focus on those who are not making it in the same way, who are homeless or underfed or undereducated or underexposed to the benefits of our society. We are actually taught in a very subtle way not to examine the faults of cyclic existence. So now we have to do something that is a tough habit for us to break. We have to do something that is against what we have learned. We have to really examine the faults of cyclic existence. And in order to do that, we have to look around, and that takes a great deal of courage. Very, very hard to do, because we would much rather look at what is pleasurable. We would much rather look ahead and see what we can do. We're afraid that if we're traveling on this road, climbing up this hill, and the goal is clearly up this hill, we're afraid that if we take our eyes off that hill and look down at what everyone else is experiencing and feel compassion and see clearly that this is not working out for a lot of beings, that somehow we might be stopped and our progress might be faulted. And there's something to that, you know. There really is something to that. It takes a tremendous focus to look straight ahead to get where you want to go. And if you become too kind and too concerned with others, some of your energy might be dispersed. You might not be thinking about your goals. So the courage that it takes for us to really examine the faults of cyclic existence really challenges us, really causes us to do what makes us feel shaky. And in that process, we even have to examine our own motivation and our own technique. All of these things are scary, really tricky. But if we allow ourselves to do that, and if we accept this challenge and examine the faults of cyclic existence, then next we have to go further. If we truly see the faults of cyclic existence as even these little children are learning to do at this time, what are we going to come up with? We're going to come up with the idea that all sentient beings experience suffering, that all of cyclic existence is pervaded with suffering. And even we who are sitting here going, hey, you know, I look good, I'm not suffering, I'm not doing too bad, I basically have what I want. Even we have to challenge ourselves on that, because if we can say that, we're not looking very closely. We're not experiencing the fact that each and every one of us has been sick and will be sick again. That each and every one of us, against our will, is aging and experiencing the physical, mental, and psychological difficulties associated with aging, against our will. You can try to think positive about it, but not for one moment have you ever agreed with it. Have you ever thought that it was just or that it should be so? My mother, in a very sad conversation, said to me, you know, I can't believe this has happened to me. I still feel like a child. I don't feel like I've fully grown up yet. I still feel like I'm a kid making the same mistakes that I used to make, and finally I'm a little wiser than I used to be, and now I look in the mirror and I'm really old. Does that seem fair to you? My mother tries to have a really positive attitude about it. She tries to, you know, feel good about the fact that she has some wisdom now, but she doesn't feel like it's fair. She suffered a lot during her life. She had a lot of pain. She raised 6 kids and she had a lot to do. And finally, when she's got a little space, she's old. And we are all experiencing that against our will. No one ever wrote that into the script. And then another thing that we're all going to experience that we can try and be positive about, and probably it's good to be positive about it, is the fact that we're all going to die. Against our will. No one ever says, well, I think I'll die today. No one ever says, hey, it looks like a good day to die. You know, no one ever really says that. I mean, you can have a good attitude about it. You can think, you can go through the adjustments that people go through when they say, I've lived a long life. I'm ready to go now. What you're basically saying is, I'm not clinging as much as I used to because I really have looked at things and I've been busy, and that seems righteous to me in some way. But no one ever really wants to get old and tired enough to die. Yet we all experience that. So even while we're sitting pretty here and we're looking good and feeling like, you know, we have the space and time right now, we're sort of enjoying ourselves and things aren't too bad, from a very fundamental point of view, we are suffering. And that suffering is a continuum that we experience again and again and again through each incarnation, according to the format of that particular incarnation and circumstance. So that's a real fault with cyclic existence. That never changes, no matter what happens. That never changes. Hard to think about, hard to take in, isn't it? But we have to take it in because we have to realize the faults of cyclic existence. And then we have to think whether there is an end to that. Now, the Buddha taught about an end to that suffering. The Buddha taught about the cessation of suffering, and the Buddha called the cessation of suffering enlightenment. And according to the Buddha, that cessation of suffering is experienced when one eliminates desire, when one eliminates the fixation on egocentricity or on self-nature and the desire that comes from that fixation. And when one eliminates hatred, greed, and ignorance from the mind stream. Under those conditions, when one attains the egoless state, and when one goes beyond that to taste the nectar of one's own true primordial wisdom nature, that nature which is luminosity and compassionate activity inseparable. These sufferings, even of old age, sickness, and death, all of them are built as though one were playing with tinker toys. They're built with blocks. They all arise from continual cause and effect relationships that are constantly expressing themselves within the continuum of egocentric experience. And right now we are creating more of them, because we are all listening to the teaching with a bias. We can't help but do that. We are egos. We have a bias, and the bias is telling us, maybe I'll take this little bit of truth. I'll accept that, but maybe I don't like that so much. Maybe I like the way she's saying this, and maybe I hate the way she's saying that. And maybe she's okay, but I don't think I like the way she fixes her hair. I mean, these are the things that run through our heads. They sound really crazy and really stupid. But they are bias that we have upon which we base our experience. And these actually manifest within our mind stream as causes for future effect that we will experience. For instance, if we hear the pure teaching of the Dharma and we say, I'll take this, but I won't take that, then we are developing a mixed karmic relationship with the Dharma. Whereas if we say, these teachings arise from the enlightened mind, the enlightened compassion of the Buddha, and the Buddha was capable of seeing better than me, because he's enlightened and I'm not. If we can say that, and say that with some faith, perhaps we will be allowing purer cause and effect relationships to arise within our mind stream. But basically, the point that I'm trying to make at this time is that we are in a position where we must evaluate the faults of cyclic existence, and we must ascertain for ourselves whether or not we can really accept the idea that there is an end to that suffering. And if we accept that there is an end to that suffering, if we see that it's really so, then we have to decide whether or not we can put in the time, whether we can really go for it. And not all of us can do that. I mean, let's say that we look at ourselves and we don't like the way we look. Let's say that we look at ourselves and we say, well, I'm not in very good shape, and I'm sort of fat, and I don't look very good, and so maybe what I ought to do is I ought to look for the cure. Well, clearly, according to everything we know, the cure for that is going to be diet and exercise. Well, a lot of us look at ourselves in the mirror and can continue to suffer with that and continue to not do anything about it, and we don't do any diet and exercise. We simply let it slide. And we do that with Dharma also. We can say, well, the Buddha must be right. He was, after all, enlightened, so maybe the cessation of suffering really is enlightenment, and maybe that's reachable by practicing the path. According to the Buddha, that's the case. But I just don't think I can do it. I just don't think I can do it. I think I better make some more money. I think I better have a good time. I think I better try to have a nice relationship. I think I better get married. I think I better have some children. It may be that if I practice, I can stop suffering, but I just don't have the time. Hello? But we do that. Time and time again, I've had students say to me, sounds right to me, and they never come back. You must be right, and they're not here. And they're not anywhere else either. And you see them and they're just kind of floating around somewhere out in the world, bebopping around. So that's another decision that we have to make. And there's a tough one. I mean, there's a real tough one. Because we're talking about discipline. We're talking about a sustained effort. We're talking about changing. The most scariest thing that there is in cyclic existence, according to us, is to change. We tend to seek out a comfortable place that we can be, and we tend to sort of hang out there. And once we find what works for us in terms of comfortableness, relatively speaking, and comfort has different meanings for different people. I mean, some people do a little Dharma and a lot of ordinary activity, merely because if they did a lot of ordinary activity, they wouldn't really be too comfortable with themselves because they wouldn't think of themselves as spiritual. So the little bit of Dharma that they do isn't really to change or to make real progress. It's to think of themselves as spiritual beings. Isn't that an interesting place to be? So we do a little Dharma here, and maybe a little good works for other people here, and maybe we watch educational TV only, and we eat like alfalfa sprouts, and then, we live a good life, and then we're comfortable. But are we changing? Are we moving closer to enlightenment? No, we are fixating on we and comfort and how I am, and that's that. So you really have to challenge yourself. You really have to get into the idea of changing. You really have to think about that. Changing for us is so scary, so horribly frightening, because we think, well, change, I just simply can't deal with that. I don't know where I'm going to be. Well, let's examine this now. Let's get the big picture. According to the Buddha, the only thing that really happens with any consistency here in this encyclic existence is change. That's the only thing that you can put your money in the bank on. That's the only horse that's really going to come in. Because the thing that we constantly experience, no matter what, is change. You are not the same person you were 10 minutes ago. You are certainly not the person you were 10 years ago. I mean, if you don't believe me, find a picture. You are certainly not the person you were 20 years ago. These things continue to happen, and they are pretty predictable. That is going to take place. So change is something we're experiencing all the time anyway. The difference is that if you change in a disciplined way, if you accept a certain path and apply its technology, if you examine cyclic existence and see its faults and decide for yourself that you wish to apply the antidote, that you wish to experience the end of that suffering, that you wish to take an aggressive, competent stance on this matter, the difference between that kind of change that you will have to experience, there's no doubt about that, and the kind of change that you're going to experience anyway, is that in one, you have control. In the first one, you have control. You have some say-so in the change that you're going to experience naturally. It's not an intelligent change. And I have so many people come to me and say, well, I'm a thinker. I like to choose very carefully what I accept, and I don't think I'm going to accept the Buddha's teachings because he thought of it, not me. So I'm going to do what I think. And so these people think that they are being very intelligent and that they are being thinkers. They are discriminating thinkers. In fact, what they are doing is they are allowing their concepts to rule them, concepts that are formed within the continuum of experience that one has due to the belief in self-nature as being inherently real. It is a reactive experience. It is an artificial experience. It is a deluded experience. Even one's five senses, upon which we base our conclusions, those five senses that we love and trust so implicitly, are only extensions of our ego, and they only see things relative to self-nature, which is an artificial construction and which is inherently empty. To formulate ideas according to that data, according to that information, is entirely a deluded experience. Whereas to assess the faults and the antidote for cyclic existence from an enlightened perspective, as the Buddha has done, free of such delusion, free of the belief in self-nature as being inherently real, and according to his ability to abide spontaneously in that primordial wisdom nature, through that view, to ascertain the big picture, it's a very different experience. And so one is actually thinking, one is actually a thinking, competent, intelligent person, making intelligent decisions, engaging in intelligent change, if one utilizes this far more profound perspective. But if one waits for things to come to one's own through one's own intelligence, if one waits for one's own ability to intellectualize the process or to see for oneself what is good and what is real, one is going to wait a long and stupid time. And I don't mean to be cruel about this, but really sometimes we need a little nudge, as they say where I come from. And that nudge is based on understanding that we are waiting to make a deluded computation through deluded experience. It's not an intelligent choice. It's not a thinking choice. The reason why I'm bringing all of this up is that now we have the opportunity to begin a fabulous and profound journey on a path that has a very exacting technology according to the view of one who has attainment, to accept empowerment and to follow accordingly, to practice accordingly. In the beginning, we won't understand everything that we see. We will not understand what we're supposed to do. We will probably feel totally lost. In fact, that feeling lasts for a real long time. And we will feel like we're sort of being led around trying to get the big picture, and we will feel like we don't understand the terminology and we don't have a good understanding. But again, we are waiting for an understanding to occur to us through an intellect whose only input occurs due to a deluded process. And we are waiting to be satisfied in that way, as though that made a difference, rather than really take a very courageous point of view in which one examines for oneself the faults of cyclic existence, sees for oneself whether it is not reasonable to assume that there is an end to that cycle of circular existence. By attaining enlightenment and awakening to the nature and no longer continuing in the deluded continuum that makes the cause-effect relationships that comprise cyclic existence. Whether it is not reasonable, therefore, to follow using the eyes and the wisdom and the direction of one who speaks from the other side, in a sense, of the ocean of suffering. who has crossed the ocean of suffering, and who speaks to us from an enlightened perspective, whether it is not more reasonable to do that than it is to try and think up yet another artificial set of compilations, of ideations, another recipe. In closing, if we examine, we can think for ourselves that we've been doing this for a very long time. Not the Dharma part, doing the Dharma part for a very long time. We wouldn't be doing it some more. We, in fact, have been relying on our five senses, relying on our perceptual experience, thinking that that is intelligence, bouncing around in a reactive mode, continuing on the continuum, deluding ourselves with the clinging to the belief in self-nature as being inherently real, and floating on the sensual experience that we contrive due to all of those things. This is what we've been doing since time out of mind, in a continuum that reaches so far back into time and space that we can't even see its root. We can't even understand it. Without the full omniscience of Buddhahood, we can't even imagine the uncountable time that we have existed in this mode. And all that it has ever brought us is the continuing in the continuum. The optimum result, enlightenment, cannot be reached accidentally. If one simply continues in the continuum, one will not fall into enlightenment. One will not naturally get to the top. That's a stupid idea, because cause and effect relationships are always exacting. On the other hand, if one brings about the causes for enlightenment, virtuous activity, practice, the dissemination of the idea of self-nature, the attainment of the egoless state, the meditation and spontaneous abiding on the pure nature which is luminosity and compassion. These things are what bring about the precious awakened state, and therefore the end of suffering. So I hope that when you consider whether or not you're going to take these empowerments, and when you consider how you are going to accept them, and when you think what you're going to do with the rest of your life, I hope that you do make intelligent choices, and I hope that you do not misunderstand what intelligent means. Because I say this about myself, and therefore saying it about myself, I feel that I have the right to say it about you. Until the moment that we accept practicing the path that leads to liberation and applying the antidote in some sincere way, we have been very stupid. Simply and clearly, we have the opportunity to not be stupid anymore. And that's the blessing that we should consider when we take these teachings.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We always enjoy these teachings, and again and again and again over the years, even though they were shot so many years ago, back in the early days of television. We do bring them to you twice a week, Wednesday evenings at 7:30, which you're enjoying right now on YouTube, and Sundays at 11 a.m. also on YouTube. Saturdays and Sundays at 10 a.m. on YouTube. We also have a meditation that's led by one of our nuns, and it's based on a book by Jetsunma called Stabilizing the Mind, a meditational technique to develop spaciousness in the mind. So if you're interested in that, you're welcome to come and join us. That's 10 a.m. on Saturdays and Sundays. YouTube, and they're also online. If you miss them on live, you can catch them later. Every evening at 7 p.m., we share a Medicine Buddha practice on Facebook, and that practice is a short one in English that is a condensed practice with all the power of the long ones, but doable for Westerners, and you can come with that. We began it at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, and continue it still because there's so much sickness and death around us that everyone is looking for Medicine Buddha. So here it is. Daily, we also offer you silk offering, which is a food offering. It's a way of getting tremendous merit, and then you can use that to, change the world, right? It's Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. on Zoom, Saturdays at noon, and Sundays at 2. This is the Zoom practice is. You can go on the calendar. Let me start there, online, which is on Meditate, Pray, Study. Or I think the link is actually. Let's see, is it in here? Is it in the chat? Anyway, it's under Meditate, Pray, Study, and the first thing you see is the calendar and the webcast, and so you can look there and find find the different events, find out how to get there. You just click on the event, you'll find out how to get there, and if there's a practice, you'll be able to, there's a link to download it so that you can join right in. So that hopefully will give you the opportunity to join in. For the next 7 weeks, and that's until the 22nd of January, we're going to be doing a Chinrezi Sur and 100 Deities at 12:30 on Sundays on Zoom also. This is specifically for a friend of ours who was one of our monks who passed away, and we're doing it the day he passed, which is Sunday, for the 7 weeks that he's in the Barda, or intermediate state, before his next rebirth. So we're offering that for him and for his safe transit. If you have anyone else that you want to put in that, you can keep them in your mind. Come join us. Let's see. This coming Sunday is Guru Rinpoche Day. In addition to being New Year's and just about everything else, I'm not even going to try to tell you what the calendar is on Sunday. Just go to the calendar that I've just described. Click on the Sunday on the 1st, and if there's anything there you want to join, you just click on that event and it'll tell you how to get there, because it's a very full day. So there are practices starting, I think, at 8:30 and just continuing. So that's our schedule calendar, and we invite you to join in all of it, and whatever you can, or watch it later online. If you want to make, excuse me, an offering to Jetsunma on the occasion of receiving a teaching, you can do that on her PayPal account is jetsumagift@gmail.com, and you can send an offering that way. And also, if you are in the area, please come and visit. We would love to have you come. And the outside is open dawn to dusk every day. And it's just beautiful. Walking trails, meditation gardens, statues, places to just feel spiritual and sit and reflect. There's also things you can do actively. There's gardening. There's let's see, a lot of animals that you can enjoy. And so there's a lot of things to either do or just enjoy, and your choice. We invite you. We'd love to have you. The prayer room itself is open on weekends now, 11 a.m. to 4 p.m. Make sure you have an N95 or 94 mask, and come. You can ring at the front door. I think there's signage around, but basically, or you can just come around to the back door and ring the bell during those hours. But 11 to 4 p.m. Saturdays and Sundays is what we're able to do right now, and who knows what's next. But hopefully, more in the new year. Hope you have a great holiday, more and a wonderful new year, and we hope to see you as much as possible. Take care.